The coaching carousel is winding down. Many of the desirable jobs have been filled. Some of the undesirable jobs have been filled. We got some of the best coaches in college football moving up. We've got some of the best coordinators in the NFL deciding, hey, we're going to stay put. And the greatest coach of all time is still looking for gainful employment. So we're going to get into all of that today. First off, the biggest hiring of the offseason, Jim Harbaugh, national champion, one of the finest coaches in all of football, NFL or college, has taken the Los Angeles Chargers job. And a lot is being made out of this. People are saying, well, if it doesn't work now with Herbert, it's Herbert's fault. If it doesn't work now with that team, it's just a cursed organization. I am somewhat skeptical if they're going to find immediate success in that division. They should, but they're still in cap hell. They're still either going to have to cut one of their best, if not the best, pass rusher in the NFL, generated 17 sacks, and Khalil Mack. You either have to cut him or pay a monstrous amount of money, go way over the salary cap. You lose out on the ability to sign people. Your skill players, massive question. Are you going to be able to get Quentin Johnson to work? Jim Harbaugh knows exactly how good Quentin Johnson is based off that TCU-Michigan game last year, but everything is still up in the air. The only solid fact is that he is in LA and he has his quarterback. Assuming, of course, he doesn't go draft J.J. McCarthy. I think he's going to be able to make it work. I'm upset Michigan is losing out on him, but the NCAA kind of screwed that up for Big Blue. And I think it's a good hire, and he was the most desirable guy out there in this coaching cycle. But I still don't know if this immediately changes things for the Chargers.
He's the best possible hire the Chargers could have hoped for. He's the only guy I think that can really save their franchise at this point. I mean, you take a look at his resume, he's the perfect culture builder. When he went to Stanford, they were a one-win team, won 4 games in their first year, and then a couple years later, they finished in the top 4 in the AP poll, and then he went on to the NFL, where in the NFL, immediately he wins 13 games with Alex Smith as his quarterback, who looked like a bust, lost in the conference championship to the Giants, who then went on to win the Super Bowl. The next year, he goes to the conference championship again, goes to the Super Bowl, and loses to his brother in the Super Bowl with Colin Kaepernick as his quarterback. In his 3rd season, he goes to the conference championship again, runs into the best season of the Legion of Boom, loses to them, and they go on to win the Super Bowl.
So what you're saying is if you're in the AFC, you should be desperately trying to play the Chargers so you can beat Jim Harbaugh, which guarantees
in the conference
a Super Bowl.
Championship.
In the conference championship. It could be in the divisional round. Depends when you find him, but...
Point being, in his first 3 years and 3 of his only 4 years in the NFL as a head coach, he went to the conference championship and took a 49ers team that for 8 straight years either had a losing season or they had one 500 season thrown in there. So I am very confident in his ability to return to the NFL, but I don't think he'll necessarily see immediate success, but at some point he's going to find success with the Chargers. I mean, with Michigan, they were not good for many years leading up to the Harbaugh era.
In defense of Michigan, that was the Rich Rodriguez experience. You can't really blame Michigan for that. They're still one of the premier flagship programs. They were a good jumping in point.
They were 3-12 against Ohio State from 2000 all the way up until Harbaugh got there. They struggled for 5 or 6, didn't struggle, were very good for 5 or 6 years. We're still losing.
They struggled. You forget that COVID year. They were not good in that
COVID year doesn't really count. Then after that COVID year, he goes 12-2, beats Ohio State. Next year, he goes to the college football playoff, loses 1 game. And this past year, they were national champions. So when it comes to the long haul, over the next 4 seasons, the Chargers are going to be very relevant. It just depends on how they're able to build their roster as far as competing with the Chiefs, but they're going to be right back in the playoffs after what we saw with Brandon Staley kind of destroying whatever culture had existed within the organization. And when you look at Justin Herbert specifically, he got worse every single year Brandon Staley was there. He entered the NFL with 31 touchdowns, 38 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons, was incredible, had some of the best first 2 years a quarterback has ever had in their careers. And then with Brandon Staley and that organization, it was downhill since then. So Jim Harbaugh, an offensive guy who found success with Alex Smith and found success with Colin Kaepernick, things are only going to go up for Justin Herbert in the future. Now I'll speak to what you said.
You have spoken enough.
I have one point to agree with you on. And just to add on, is the very near future, I have major doubts because you mentioned some of the defensive pieces. Keenan Allen's likely gone. Mike Williams could be a cap casualty considering he's going to be a $32 million cap hit. Quentin Johnson looked like a bust last year. Austin Eckler is way past his prime. So when it comes to next year competing right away, I think it's going to be really difficult, but I feel very optimistic for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, you're right. Justin Herbert does need to get over himself a little bit because he's only going to have Quentin Johnson to throw to next year. It's time to figure out if that guy can play in the NFL or not because he is going to be wide receiver 1 for a so-called elite quarterback going into year, what years of Herbert? 5?
5, I think.
Going into year 5. Buckle up.
6.
Going into year 6.
I don't know.
We need to get someone to set up the lights, film the recordings, have a laptop. We need a Jamie. We need to get Bing AI to be Jamie for us. Maybe that's how we get Trey Turner on the show finally. Hey, Trey, we got a nice laptop for you. Open invitation. The problem with the Chargers is Justin Herbert's numbers, I think, are still going to dip, or at the very least, not improve drastically. You say, oh, well, Jim Harbaugh's a quarterback coach. He's an offensive coach. Jim Harbaugh is in the business of winning, and a lot of times that winning looks different from year to year. Herbert's numbers are not going to improve because there are going to be games where Jim Harbaugh runs the ball 30 times. Against Penn State, one of the best defenses in college football, when you've got J.J. McCarthy, first-round pick, 5-star quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, playing good football all year, amazing completion rate. You say, hey, we're throwing it 8 times, we're not going to throw it once in the second half. They're not going to go away from the pass that much in L.A., but there are going to be games where we see Herbert take 20 attempts or less. The numbers aren't going to improve. The winning might, but that is one side of this I don't think people are talking about. The assumption that Herbert is immediately going to start having 5,000-yard, 40-touchdown seasons is ridiculous. It's not happening. It's just this.
Well, I mean, over the last 2 seasons, he's only had 25 and 20 touchdowns, and he's been less efficient as a passer.
Now, to be fair, he was hurt last season, so it's hard to just take those numbers and say, oh, look, fall off. And maybe he gets hurt to start next year. Jim Harbaugh ponders why he even went to the NFL while Sharon Moore wins the 2nd straight national championship for the Michigan Wolverines. Lovely, lovely hypotheticals. Anyway, now that we have rambled on for 10 minutes about that, we're going to stroll over and look at the Washington situation. Now, Ben Johnson, one of the hottest hires in the NFL, was supposed to go take a head coaching job there. If the Falcons didn't want a coach to immediately come in and replace Arthur Smith, I think Ben Johnson would have probably gotten strong consideration for that. They had not gone so hard on Harbaugh and Belichick. Now, he has said, hey, I'm staying in Detroit. I do not want that Washington job. I get you waiting till after the playoffs so you could woo me. Doesn't matter. I am staying with the Lions. Washington is then forced to hire Dan Quinn. And while Dan Quinn is a good defensive coach, I understand what he has done for various programs in the past. I just don't think he's the answer. Any team which goes out and hires a defensive coach in the year 2024, I'm skeptical about. There are exceptions. I think Belichick could have been a great coach somewhere. Might not have been a good general manager anymore, but I am skeptical about you investing in your defense, particularly when you are going to have either Drake May, Caleb Williams, or Jaden Daniels, a rookie quarterback with a ton of potential, leading your offense. I don't like that move for Washington. I think Washington definitely would have had Ben Johnson over him. I think the narrative that the asking price was too high was ridiculous. This was a Ben Johnson not wanting to be part of their organization thing, as opposed to them not being able to pay him. And I'm not optimistic at all for the Commanders. I don't think it's going to go well for May or Caleb or whichever quarterback we get in there. Things are only looking bleaker and bleaker in the NFC least.
Well, it's kind of funny, the narratives that have been pushed with the need to hire offensive coaches when you have a young quarterback in there, and then we see some defensive coordinators get jobs immediately after Arthur Smith, an offensive coach, fails with the Falcons. Nathaniel Hackett failed with the Broncos. And then we had Frank Reich also fail with the Panthers. So maybe there's not as much to the whole offensive coordinator narrative as we thought. I mean, with the Texans, DeMeco Ryans has been a phenomenal young coach and brought them to the playoffs. So I think that narrative has been a little bit overblown when it comes to teams being successful with an offensive coordinator as a head coach or a former defensive coordinator as a head coach. And when it comes to Dan Quinn, I've seen a lot of people memeing the hire because they say it's the same thing as Ron Rivera, and it's like they're hiring just a worse or better version of him. And it is a better version of Ron Rivera. You look at Ron Rivera's career, if you take away the 15-1 year where he had Hall of Fame Luke Kuechly and Cam Newton and the best season of his career, If you take that season away, he has one other season where he finished as a head coach with an above 500 record. So he has not been a great or even really good head coach in the NFL with the Commanders or with the Panthers outside of the one magical Super Bowl run with an elite defense and Cam Newton in his prime. And then you look at Dan Quinn, you take a look at what he did for the Falcons earlier in his career. He went to the Super Bowl, had another above 500 season, a couple 7-9s, then went 0-5 and got fired. And it's not like Ron Rivera where immediately he went and got another job and there was no coordinator time in between. In between the Falcons and now, he went to the Cowboys, had several top 5 scoring defenses, had 2 years where he had top 5 passing defenses, and he had 3 years of high-level success as a coordinator. So I think there's something to be said for that, and it is far and away different. It is very different from the Ron Rivera hiring.
You're knock on Riverboat Ron, who I actually have a lot of respect for because he was very early on adopting the aggressive fourth down stuff, beat the analytics to it. Your knock on him is, he only had one good season outside the year he went to the Super Bowl. And then you go and list off Dan Quinn's resume, which includes one good season as a head coach outside the year he went to the Super Bowl.
It was also 6 years compared to 9 at Panthers and Falcons.
I think there is a big difference in being the Falcons head coach and being the Panthers head coach because organizationally, you don't have to deal with Tepper. I also think it is fairly easy to have a successful defense when
Ron
you have
Rivera
the
didn't
talent
have Tepper.
that the Dallas Cowboys have. That is a fairly easy system to have a good pass defense. Oh, look, you've got 2 Hall of Fame pass rushers and all pros in your secondary. They were able to stop the pass. Congratulations. It's not a big move one way or the other. Maybe Quinn's better. Maybe he's worse. It still doesn't move the needle. We have seen what Dan Quinn can do. Unless you are going to get a nice, young, promising mind in there to be the offensive coordinator, it's not going to work out. You point to, Arthur Smith didn't work out in Atlanta. He was an offensive-minded head coach. You look at KOC in Minnesota. First year, won 13 games. Second year, almost in the playoffs while starting 17 different quarterbacks. You look at that meatball coach of the Giants, who is definitely an offensive head coach. Brought Josh Allen success in Buffalo. Brought Daniel Jones to the playoffs.
We're getting Brian Dable praise?
A ridiculous feat. Now, granted, he's fallen off a little bit, in large part due to most people being hurt and his charlatanry being exposed. But it is still definitely more beneficial to hire offensive coaches. Saying Frank Reich didn't work out, yeah, I could have told you that one before the season started. He was not exactly some hotshot offensive coordinator. He was an old, grumpy coach who got fired from his last job, and Tepper decided, hey, we're going to bring him in to mess up Bryce Young's development with absolutely nothing else around him. I would have hired an offensive coach. I think unless you get a strong offensive supporting staff, which Dan Quinn's been in the NFL long enough, he can probably find someone to be his offensive coordinator. But unless you do that, behind that offensive line, whoever they bring in is going to fail, and their priority should be the success of that quarterback. Having said that, it's hard to imagine they're worse than they were last season.
That's for sure, and they have a ton of cap space, rookie quarterback coming in, and there's not that much to this piece of it. But like I said, I think there is something to say that he was not a head coach for a few years in between the Falcons and now. And he's also 5 years younger than Rivera was when Rivera took the Commanders job. So I think there's an argument that can be made that he may have learned something from his failures as a head coach last time he was with the Falcons. And I think there's a lot of potential with how good of a defensive coordinator he is that he can maybe build something with the Commanders.
Hopefully he learned to run it on third down.
I mean, I would like him to fail as a Giants fan. It would only benefit me.
If you greatly hate the Washington Commanders as a Giants fan, having witnessed one positive season in their franchise's history during your lifetime, which was probably capped off with RG3 destroying his knee. If you hold animosity to that franchise, you are a petulant child. Grow up.
I don't hold any animosity, but I'm a fan of a team that's in their division, so if they fail, it makes it easier for the Giants to succeed.
In our favorite team's division, Ben Johnson staying with the Lions, we touched on that briefly at the start of that, that is not going to go well for the rest of the NFC North. We were in a position where you're going to have to say, well, maybe they don't have their offensive identity, they fall off offensively a little bit, their defense still struggles. They got Ben Johnson, they're not going to lose anyone notable in free agency, they have a ton of cap space, and they've got draft capital. The Lions are going to be one of the best teams in the NFL next season. If Jared Goff holds them back, great. If Campbell's fourth down philosophy holds them back, great. They're still winning 12 to 13 games at minimum, unless, of course, the team busts, crashes, and sprains everyone's ankle. Ben Johnson staying in Detroit automatically makes them one of the 2 favorites to appear in the Super Bowl out of the NFC. No one in that division is better than them.
Well, I'm a big fan of what Ben Johnson is doing, staying with the Lions. Big fan of Bobby Slowik staying with the Texans. I think it's a little refreshing to see coordinators stay with 2 promising offenses that have a lot of potential to keep getting better. I mean, why? It's still a great job in the NFL if you're the Lions and you're their offensive coordinator. You have a tight end who's going to be maybe the best tight end in the NFL over the next 5 seasons, especially with Travis Kelce aging and retiring at some point. You have an elite wide receiver 1, you have elite young running back with a very, very solid running back 2, and you have a top 5 offensive line in the NFL.
You have the best offensive line in the NFL if they're healthy. There's no need to bandy around the bush with that. They are better than the Eagles and 49ers.
Who wouldn't want to coach that? Regardless is my point. That is a fun offense to be a part of, and a fun, especially when you get to work with Dan Campbell, who he has only spoken glowingly of, instead of going to someone like the Commanders or Falcons, where you don't have a quarterback or you have a very young quarterback you have to develop, and the Commanders are a mess organizationally with everything else. So it makes sense to stay with the Lions, and if you bring the Lions organization and you're part of that process to bring them to a Super Bowl, the demands that apparently were outlandish to owners all of a sudden are outlandish, and he can make whatever demand he wants whenever he wants to be a head coach in the NFL. So I'm a big fan of offensive coordinators staying with a team that has a young and promising offense. Same thing with the Texans. Why wouldn't you want to coach C.J. Stroud and be a part of that growth and development when he just had the best rookie season in the NFL since Andrew Luck? And you get to work with DeMeco Ryans, who's helping to turn that Texans organization around from a few down years. So I'm a big fan of and also the passing game coordinator with the Texans is saying, or it was something like that.
We can rah-rah these things as much as you want. I do think there is something to be said for being in a system you like, not having to assume all the responsibilities of a head coach. I think Ben Johnson and any promising coordinator who chose to stay with their team this offseason, it also comes from the fact that NFL owners are quicker than ever to fire unsuccessful head coaches. You look what happened with Frank Reich. You look what happened with Lovie Smith. You look at these guys who get stuck with a bad team and don't turn it around in 1 year or get worse because they're going through a rebuild. Damn, that was an ineffective snap. I'm not even going to try that again. Immediately fired. You don't have the leash you used to. So if you go and you screw up your coaching job, you will probably not get another shot for at least a decade. It is harder now than ever to hold on to your head coaching job, and you want to go to the best possible situation for your first job so it doesn't wind up being your last job.
And if you're one of these young coaches, the more years of successful offensive coordinating you have under your belt, if you go ahead and aren't that successful as a head coach, you have a better resume to then go get another job and maybe have a second shot at the head coaching job down the line.
Granted, I think if this is going to be the case regardless, if Ben Johnson goes and fails as a head coach, the narrative is going to sprout up, well, look at what he had on offense. Great O-line, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Laporta, Gibbs, Goff. Jared Goff played really well in the playoffs this year. Side note on that. You look at that, and people are going to say, well, he got carried by his high-end talent. And you can't really get around that while being the OC in Detroit, but still, it's building the resume a little bit. Anyway, worth noting is that the greatest coach of all time, the greatest defensive mind of all time, has remained unemployed throughout this entire coaching cycle. And from the looks of things, he is going to stay unemployed and not have a job next year. And I understand why teams are going away from hiring Bill Belichick. There is a real issue that he will either voluntarily or involuntarily completely usurp your front office. If I was an inexperienced general manager, which if you're in the position to hire a new head coach, you probably are, I would be a bit concerned about that. I understand why the snake oil he sells is not really going anywhere else. But at the end of the day, it is still astounding that he has not found a place to coach. Some franchise somewhere has to have said to themselves, well, we have all these young, promising hires, but Bill Belichick moves the needle a whole lot more for us, both PR-wise and culture-wise. That is shocking to me. Granted, odds are he's going to sit out a year and then find a job immediately next season because some team realizes, oh wait, we should have hired Belichick, or oh wait, we have to fire this bum we brought in instead of him, so hey.
Well, it's not that surprising considering Belichick's reputation now of needing complete control of the organization from a player personnel perspective, from a scouting perspective, and he's also older. That's not really being mentioned enough. A lot of these hires that we've seen at these teams are younger coaches. Raheem Morris, Mike Macdonald. All these coaches, younger guys that have the ability, if they succeed, it's the ideal scenario because they'll then be with their organizations for a very long time. Bill Belichick, we don't know how many years he has left as a head coach, so I'm sure that's something that maybe played into some of that decision-making and everything that Isaiah also mentioned about control of the organization and maybe being stuck in his ways a little bit.
But anyway, let's talk about the NFC South.
Panthers, Dave Canales. This hire is a little funny to me because you take a look at Baker Mayfield last season, failed with the Panthers, then goes to the Rams. Then he has a great season under Canales with the Buccaneers. And then Dave Tepper's like, I want that guy. He fixed the quarterback that did bad for my organization, who I also shipped off very quickly in favor of whoever else the Panthers were starting that year. I don't even remember at this point.
Matt Caroll, I think, or Coral, whatever you say.
Corral, Sam Darnold, I'm sure, was in there at some point. They were rolling out whoever. And what he did with Baker Mayfield was impressive. Baker had the best year of his career. Very good in the pass game. Over 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, just 10 interceptions. Of course, he also had Mike Evans to throw to, Chris Godwin to throw to. Rashad White was very effective out of the backfield as a receiver and as a runner. Not the greatest offensive line, but it was impressive with what he was able to accomplish. And he's not necessarily going to have that with the Panthers. With the offensive pieces that they have, the offensive line that they have, they certainly don't really have an effective running back, and they have Bryce Young. So I think it's a solid hire. It's as good as the Panthers were going to get given their owner's reputation. I'm happy for Dave Canales. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his last name.
I'm not happy for him because he's in hell. You look at what the Buccaneers had last season, and Baker Mayfield and Bryce Young are similar in the sense that they can move out a little bit. They're more athletic than most people really give them credit for, but you want them in a controlled system where they can hit their routes and show off their arm talent. Baker Mayfield had the world given to him by going and be the Buccaneers quarterback. He had a great blindside tackle. He had #1 receivers and he had an offensive-minded coach. Now, or an offensive-minded coordinator who got him. Now, Bryce Young only has the coordinator who hopefully gets him. Ike Ekwonu's been terrible. The receivers are non-existent. Was Adam Thielen going to step up and fill the role Mike Evans filled for Baker Mayfield for Bryce Young as he slowly gets older and older and withers away like an overripe orange? Where's the running game? Where are the receivers? Where's the tight end? There is nothing. And we're early enough in the offseason where these issues haven't been addressed, but I just don't see the Panthers satisfactorily building their offense to get to the point Bryce Young can succeed. He really is in the worst possible situation. I know CJ Stroud was great his rookie year. I don't think CJ Stroud would have had that much success in Carolina. I think we'd be calling him a massive bust like every other Ohio State quarterback if he wound up going first overall to this team. This is the worst possible place to play quarterback, worst possible place to play football. The fans are terrible and apathetic. The owner's a head case. You're in Charlotte. No one wants to be in Charlotte. And it just stinks.
Well,
so
also,
the needle's not moving.
Well, something just to maybe make his resume look a little bit better. He was also the passing game coordinator during Russ's last few good years in Seattle and was the passing game coordinator and has been given credit by the people around him for
given credit by the people around him. Shocking. His
Well,
camp says good things about him.
No, by the people around him, I mean people within the Seahawks organization have credited him for some of Geno Smith's success in his best season as a starter the year prior to this one. I think there's potential for him to kind of have Bryce Young do well, but I just don't have a whole lot of faith in that because of David Tepper and the dumpster fire of a culture he's created in Carolina, throwing drinks on fans, infusing his decision-making into personnel, sending down paper airplanes to the coach from his press box with plays
That's
drawn
actually
on them.
kind of cool. I like that. Now, he probably shouldn't have run the plays, but the idea of throwing a paper airplane with your secret encoded message to your head coach, that's an A+. Good on you, Tepper. Anyway.
I made that up.
Aw. Man, that's unfortunate. My heart is broken by that. I had not paid much attention to the Panthers this year. I knew the drinks thing happened. I figured that, hey, there's a chance.
You thought he was making a paper airplane and sending it 500 feet?
I didn't think you were creative enough to come up with that, I'll be honest with you. That got me excited, man. You've ruined the rest of my day. Talk about the Bucs.
The Bucs? You mean the Falcons? Or do you want to talk about the Seahawks?
Let's talk about the Seahawks.
Seahawks, Mike Macdonald. I love the hire. Was very successful with Michigan as their defensive coordinator. Then over the past 2 seasons, built the best defense in the NFL with the Ravens. They absolutely suffocated teams this year. Even in the playoffs against the Chiefs, they did their job, held them to 17 points, were phenomenal. So then you go to the Seahawks, who on the defensive side of the ball, over the last 6 seasons, they haven't finished better than 17th when it comes to yards allowed per game. So he has the ability to step in there, really fix up that defense. And on the offensive side of the ball, they have all the weapons to work with. They have 3 very good receivers, 2 very good running backs. Offensive line is a little shaky. Maybe you say the quarterback situation is a little shaky. I tend to believe in Geno Smith, but I think it's a great situation for him to go to. The only thing that, for him, you maybe feel a little nervous is when you're stepping into a legend's shoes in Pete Caroll, and you have the way people view Pete Caroll in Seattle and the way he's kind of viewed around the NFL, a potential Hall of Famer, and you have to go
in. Definite Hall of Famer, without a doubt Hall of Famer. Almost certainly a Hall of Famer.
When you have to go do that, it's not exactly easy to follow that right up when you have some of those question marks on the offensive side of the ball.
The John Harbaugh defensive system has worked in college. It's worked in the NFL. The question is, can it be run as the head coach by someone other than John Harbaugh? We've seen it work in college. At Michigan, obviously, last 2 Michigan defensive coordinators, both Harbaugh disciples, John, not Jim. I am skeptical if it can work in the NFL, in large part due to the weakness of the Seattle Seahawks front 7. That needs to be addressed heavily in the offseason, heavily in free agency, heavily in the draft. If that area improves, if they use serious capital on that, then I could see this coaching hire working out. If not, I'm still less than optimistic. Pieces are needed on that Seahawks defense. Him coming in there does not immediately solve all of their defensive woes and does not immediately put them defensively on the caliber of the 49ers. And it might not even put them on the same caliber as the Rams. Granted, Aaron Donald's the only man holding that defense together, but...
Most competitive division in the NFL. Certainly in the NFC.
Certainly got to preface the NFC part.
Anyway, last team to talk about, I think, the Falcons. Kind of a funny coaching hire for this reason. They had a young offensive coach in Arthur Smith, but he was unlikable. And then they went in the complete opposite direction, hired a defensive coach who is very likable. I mean, you had Les Snead, the Rams GM, former employer, saying that he's probably going to have to be dealing with tampering charges because he'd imagine there's going to be players calling up wanting to play for Raheem Morris. So from that standpoint, getting a coach that is very well liked by players, the defense is probably going to be good under him. And of course, another question mark, defensive coach figuring out the offensive side of the ball with a major question mark at the quarterback position. But from that standpoint, going from a coach that wasn't all well liked, wasn't using the offensive talent, it feels like a hire that can only go up with what we saw from the Falcons last year.
It's easy to say Arthur Smith was not well liked after the fact he has failed miserably and gotten himself fired. I think it was probably well liked in that Titans building. I'm sure Mike Vrabel is probably going to bring him along to be the offensive coordinator of whatever
He's the offensive coordinator at the Steelers now.
Oh, God, they already hired him. I forgot about that. Well, I'm sure he's going to be well-liked in that building. I cannot wait for Jonnu Smith to put on the black and gold. That's going to be a great moment as they throw 50 passes to him instead of George Pickens and Jonte Johnson. Oh, man, buckle up. The Falcons organization is still one piece away. You can say what you want about the defensive-minded head coach. You can say what you want about the owner of the organization. If they cannot address the quarterback position, they're not going to succeed, and that building will turn toxic very quickly. You look at what happened with the Jets. Well-constructed team for the most part, failed completely, had their organization go super sour over the past 2 seasons because they didn't have a quarterback to lead their high-level offense, to lead their deceptively good defense. Well, maybe the defense was just good, not deceptively good. That is going to happen in Atlanta. His success, Raheem's, will be entirely dictated by how they address that position in the offseason. I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe they draft Jaden Daniels. That will be a bad move, in my opinion. Maybe they go sign a free agent. Maybe Kirk Cousins comes on down to Atlanta.
Maybe they trade for Justin Fields.
Yeah, maybe.
But it is the NFC South. You have the Panthers. They're not going to be competitive. The Saints, They have a chance at being competitive.
We do this every year. They are winning 9 to 6 games, man. They're not going to be competitive. We are not doing this again. They're $85 quadrillion over the salary cap. They're going to restructure their deals, somehow have $1 million in cap space to sign a veteran offensive tackle who's going to have to start 12 games for them. We're not doing this again, man. The Saints are not a good team. They're not winning the division. The Buccaneers or the Falcons are going to do that.
And then there's the Buccaneers, who just lost their offensive coordinator. Mike Evans may walk, considering he's a free agent. And is Baker Mayfield a free agent, or did he sign a 2-year contract?
I'm just going to address the Mike Evans part of that. There's no shot Mike Evans walks. He is aware that it benefits one greatly when trying to get into the Hall of Fame if they were to stay with one team. He is not going to go from Tampa, a state with limited tax laws, which are likely to pay him more than anyone else, where he has his family, where he is loved. He's not going to go take that and say, in New England, they could give me pretty good contract. He's not doing it. Mike Evans is staying, man.
Unless Kansas City comes knocking.
Oh, Kansas City's already got their wide receiver 1 of the future. They're all right without the wide receiver 1 of the past.
That has been this week's podcast. If you're still listening, use code Thicc on Underdog. Put in some pickup entries for the Super Bowl. Doubles your deposit up to $100. So if you think you can win, use our code. It supports our channel. Like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.